to the Marina Skua podcast. Today is a horribly grey day and it's been raining a lot, and I'm really glad for the opportunity to spend a little bit of time playing around with wool. Today I'm going to show you a couple of things that I've been knitting, but mostly I'm going to be looking at what I've got in a shop update. I'm going to jump straight into it. I have been working, since I came back to work at the end of September, I've been gradually dyeing up all my colours of Mendip 4-ply. If you watched a couple of episodes ago, you'll remember that these two are the natural undyed colours of the yarn. And on those colours I dye a range of shades, and I dye them on both colours so that you get pairs of colours which combine together really nicely and give you great options for things like stranded colour work. So you have on the white base a really fresh, vibrant colour, and then on the grey base a more sort of muted, subtle, heathery version of the same colour. And sometimes they can look fairly similar. Often if it's a darker colour, the two bases look more similar, but if it's a light colour, they can look really different. So just as an example, this colour is Ore. So we've got the sunny base there. So you have this really nice, fresh, bright red. And then on the cloudy base, it's this really nice, dark, sort of moody colour. So the cloudy base in general is pretty moody, and I love all of those colours. And then the sunny base is these fresh, vibrant ones, which I like to combine in small amounts as little pops of colour in colour work and things. But they can also work really nicely on their own or together for a more like fresh, modern look for some things. So I'm going to be sharing first some new colours because I got carried away and I wanted to dye some new colours because I love creating new colours. And I'm also going to share some project inspiration for this yarn because I love it and I would love more people to knit with it. So first up, new colours. I'm very excited about these ones. So we have these. So these ones are called Yew, as in Y-E-W, like the conifer. It's one of our very few native conifers in the UK. Often planted in churchyards because they're quite poisonous and would keep the cows away from the graves. And also the wood was used, I think, for bows because it's very strong and flexible. I think it's bows, not arrows. Something to do with archery. I should have looked that up. But yeah, so this one is Yew. So you can see there that because it's quite a dark colour, on the sunny base it's not too different from the cloudy base, but the cloudy base just has a little bit more depth and moodiness to it, whereas on the sunny base it feels a tiny bit greyer, and you get a little bit more of the slight variegation in colour showing up because it's hand-dyed yarn. It's not a complete solid colour. So I love these. I've been meaning to add a dark green to the range for a long time because I really love greens and I like the way they combine with things. So I mean, if you put that in there, that's really fun and cheery, and then you can combine it with, you know, just a neutral, which sort of makes that red pop, and then the greens recede a bit but act as a really nice sort of background colour. So that's Yew, and then these ones are Clay. So on the sunny base it's this sort of fresh, cheery apricot colour, which I think combines so nicely with so many colours in the range. Like, even though it's, you know, it's quite pale but fairly saturated, as a nice sort of very warm, almost pink. it works so nicely with things like beach. This is the sunny base. I love that combination. I think that's beautiful. And then if you want it with a lighter green, this is sage on the cloudy base. I think it works really nicely with greens as well as some of the other warm colours. And then this is on the cloudy base, and you can really see there how much of a difference the base yarn makes in how the colours show up. So where on the white you've got a very light background, so it shows the colour quite true. On the grey base you get a lot more of the natural grey and texture showing through. And I think this one is really nice because previously in this range, some of you might remember, the Stormy base was a beige base instead of grey, which meant that the colours turned out a little bit warmer. The dyed colours are very, very similar on the cloudy and the stormy base. Like the stormy ones are a tiny bit warmer, but unless you're holding them side by side, you really don't notice. But with the cloudy, obviously it is grey rather than beige, so when you're using it on its own, it's a cool colour rather than a warm colour. And so I wanted to dye something that would sort of act like a warm neutral. And so I'm hoping that this will work for that. And I think, again, that combines really nicely with those. And I mean, you could use it with loads of things. I think it's just really, really pretty. Yeah, you can do lots of nice things. Yes, so I love combining colours. If you ever want colour inspiration or help with colours, or to see colours next to each other, because obviously my yarn is most of the time only available online, it can be really hard to judge looking at a screen what colours look like together. So if you are considering some of my yarn or combining other yarns for some of my patterns, I'm always happy to help you pick colours. I can send photos of yarn skeins next to each other so you can see how they look. I'm always happy to do that. It's one of my very favourite parts of what I do. So talking about colour combinations and using this yarn for colour work, I am going to show you something which you may have seen before. So if you were watching last year, you will have seen probably a few sneak peeks of a design I did for making stories. So this one is issue 7. Last month I mentioned issue 8, which I had an illustration in. This one I did a design for, and I can't show you the actual sample because it has stayed in Germany with Hannah-Lisa, because I knitted it in colours that are much more her than me. And so this is Fanlight. I'll probably put a couple of photos up on the screen properly for you so you can see nicely. But it's one I designed inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass. So specifically, if you don't know, a fanlight is often a semicircular panel that you get above a front door of a house, for example, and it will usually let light into an internal corridor or something, or a hallway. And they can be really pretty and decorative. And so yes, I did this one. Another photo there. I really, really love the design. When I came up with, for submitting to the magazine, I did, well, first I came up with the chart for the yoke, and then knitted up a big swatch and did a sketch to show how the finished garment would look. And when I was doing that, I kept thinking, it's just quite strange. It's a bit of a weird design. And just because it's quite sort of bold and graphic, and you have these strong lines coming down the yoke, sort of almost radiating from the neck, and then this row of large circle details. But I really love it. I love how it's turned out, and I think it's a really interesting one for colour combinations, because in the yoke you have all three colours. You never work three colours at once, so you only work two colours per row, but you've got sort of stripes of one of the contrast colours along with the second contrast colour, which means that the main contrast colour, so what in the pattern is contrast colour 1, needs to contrast well with both contrast colour 2 and the main colour. And the main colour and contrast colour 2 don't actually need to contrast that well with each other. The key thing is to get the main part of the design on the yoke to show up, and those stripes can be really quite subtle. So it can be really, really fun to pick out colour combinations where you could do, say, that as the main body, and then slightly darker stripes on the cloudy base, and then have something really striking for the main part of the design. And that's where having the pairs of colours works really nicely. So you could have main colour, contrast colour 2, and then something completely different for contrast colour 1. And so it's just a really fun one to come up with combinations for, and I think coming up with pairs of colours for colour work can be nice and is often fairly simple. You just want to make sure that those two colours sit nicely together and contrast well, but then when you have additional colours in the mix, it becomes a lot more interesting, because you can quite dramatically change the feel of something by even just how you place the same colours within the design. So if you swap two of the colours, it can have a real effect on how it looks, and I think that's all fascinating and loads of fun. But yes, I am just going to show you some other projects I've made with Mendip 4-ply in the past, because I just really love them, and I think it's nice sometimes to... Disclaimer, I am working on quite a lot of designs at the moment that I can't share with you, and it feels like a betrayal, because I love to share what I'm working on. But some of them are for publications and young companies and things, and they have terms that stipulate I can't share what I'm working on until close to the publication date. So some things that I'm working on now you won't be seeing until a decent way into next year. So some of the actual knitting I'm going to be showing you in a little bit. In the coming months there might be a bit less of it than there has been previously, but it's a chance to look at some other things I'm doing, and hopefully I'll have time to do some more crafting, because at the moment I'm trying hard to scrape together the time to do everything I need to do, but we basically don't have enough childcare, because childcare in this country is ridiculously expensive. And so I'm trying to do a lot of things around looking after a small baby, and it's all quite chaotic. And so yes, patience is appreciated, and I really hope that I will be able to continue sharing lots of nice things with you. I don't know where to start with these. Let's just start top of the pile. So this one actually has a couple of colours that are no longer extant, but I'll share some other ideas for you if you are interested. So this is a pair of mitts I made probably a few years back now. These are designed by Rebecca Mauser. They're called the Halo mitts, and I went for a really subtle colour combination. So I used Mendip 4-ply in the beige sunny base, stormy base, sorry, for all three of the colours. So the cuffs and thumb are sky, and then the main part of the mitten is the sheep colour, which is the undyed colour, and then combined with leaf, which is a sadly discontinued colour. But if you were to want to make them, I have, ooh, here we go. Now it gives a slightly different feel because the green is a little bit less warm, but then the grey is also less warm, so the whole palette is a little bit cooler. No, sorry, I say the green is less warm. It's sort of more warm. It's slightly less vibrant, but it's a really nice relaxed palette with very, very low contrast. So I don't even know how well you can see the colourwork design on here. But I will put up a photo of Rebecca's version in which she used Sky, Stormy and Bloom. Again, these are the cloudy ones, so very slightly different, but unless you're holding the skeins together, you'd never notice. So she used this combination, which I think is really fun. So you get really nice contrast with the white, and then the blue and yellow together are just really nice and harmonious. So that is those ones. These are lovely. They have a really nice thick double cuff, which I really enjoy because you get nice warm wrists, really. And I did one tiny modification, which is that I added a little thumb hole in mine so that I can continue to use my phone. Retrospectively, I should have done thumb holes in both mittens so that I can continue to pinch and zoom and things, so you retain full functionality of the phone, but hey ho. Still love these mittens, wear them a lot. Then this one, my printer's just decided to wake up and make itself known. Please ignore that. It's so needy. It just demands attention sometimes. This one is the contorter hat, designed by Carolyn Kern for issue 2 of Making Stories. I talk about Making Stories a lot, is because I've worked with them for a long time. At the moment I'm not working with them, but Hannah-Lisa, the owner, is a friend, and I love everything she's doing with her business. And I'm a huge fan of the magazine, and so yeah, it comes up a lot. This is Contorta from issue 2. It has really cute tiny cables, which are very pretty, and I love the crown detail, and it just sits really nicely. This one's slightly loose, so it doesn't squish my booth too much here, so it's just a nice sort of slightly, well, it doesn't have loads of slouch to it, but I like to wear it just a little bit loose at the back. Now this colour is actually a naturally dyed one I did a few years ago, which is no longer available because I am, at least at the moment and probably for the foreseeable future, I'm not doing natural dyes to sell, just because I have to have some focus somewhere, and I love doing the natural dyes, but they were never going to be repeatable colours. It was always just what dyes I had available locally. And yeah, for now I just need to be able to focus on the repeatable range. It's not to say there will never be naturally dyed yarns in the shop again, but just for now there aren't going to be any. So this was dyed with dandelions, and so I don't have a direct equivalent, but if you wanted to, it's a very strange sort of greeny yellow, well, yellowy green. So if you wanted to go for a slightly more green option, you can go for the Sage Cloudy, which is a little bit darker. I think the closest, if you want to go slightly more yellow, is Bloom on the cloudy base, which is sort of quite an acidy yellow with a tiny bit of green in it. And this is actually the colour, well, on the Stormy base, that the original sample for making stories was knitted in. And then if you wanted to go for a slightly fresher green, you could go for Sage on the Sunny base, which I really like. It's quite a nice sort of springy green without being too sort of vibrant and in your face. It's just a nice, pleasing, warm green. So yes, options for those ones there. Put that one on again for you. There we are. So yes, next one. I've got a couple of garments to show you now. So this one is my first ever yoked jumper that I knitted. So the design is Kronblad by Marina Skua. This is in the Sky colourway in both the Sunny and Stormy bases. So again, you can use the cloudy one. And I knitted this just before and partly during Edinburgh Yarn Festival in 2019, I think. Whichever the last one was. I think that was that one. And I love this pattern. I edited it, tech edited it when I did tech editing. And I really like, it's sort of quite an unusual yoke. And the fit of it is quite nice. So I've used the Stormy colourway for the main body. There are little bits of colour work at the wrist and at the hem. And then you've got the contrast for the neckband. And yes, when I was wearing it at Edinburgh, because I finished it while I was there, I got a lot of questions about it because it's just, I think it's quite an unusual design. It's a really pretty one. Verena, I don't think she is making patterns anymore or anything, but her patterns are still available. And I used to work with her a fair bit, and her patterns are lovely. Because I'm going to show you another one now. She published them under the name Sustainablist Co., I think, if you're looking for her patterns. And again, as always, I'll put links to these below so you can find them on Ravelry and things. So the next one, I've modified this one a little bit, and you will see that it's not just Mendip. So this is one, the pattern is called Vanilla Heirloom, and it's a really, really lovely basic raglan. Well, I say basic raglan, it looks basic. It's very, very well constructed and a beautifully written pattern, because a standard raglan, if you're not familiar, so a classic one, you would cast on stitches if you're working top down for the neck, and you increase at points here and at the equivalent at the back, and you increase at those points every other round. So you do 8 increases per round every other round, so you're increasing front, back and sleeves at the same rate, which is fine. It makes for really nice, easy knitting, but when you get into sort of larger sizes, or if you have a sort of, if you have, for example, skinny arms and a large bust, it can be problematic because you end up with a weird fit a lot of the time. With larger sizes, you can end up with a really deep yoke because you have to have enough rounds to increase, to get the bust measurement to what it should be. And it also means that you end up with massive sleeves for larger bust sizes, just because of the way you're increasing. This pattern is a compound raglan, which means that you increase at different rates for the front and back and sleeves, to aim for a really nice fit. And it does that. I've knitted this pattern quite a few times. And the magical thing about it is it's written for, I think, 5 different gauges, as well as quite a big size range. So it goes from I think, a light fingering up to a bulky weight, which means that pretty much whatever yarn you're using, unless, you know, it's a really, really fine lace weight or something that's very, very chunky, you can find a version of the pattern that will work, and they're all within the same pattern. I've made it a few times in various incarnations. I've done short-sleeved versions, and it's just lovely. So this one, I've used hand-spun. You can see we've got some banding on the body and sleeves there. So I used hand-spun and alternated it with Mendip. Now this is actually a previous grey Mendip that I had a very small amount of a few years ago. And it's not exactly the same as the current cloudy. You can see the cloudy there is a little bit darker. But it works out just as well. It's the same weight and everything. And so I've used just the Mendip for the neckline and the cuffs and the hem. And then for the body, I've done moss stitch or seed stitch, depending where you are. And I've alternated the yarns every round. So I've alternated between the Mendip and the hand-spun. And that means that you get a lot more subtle sort of striping in the hand-spun where the colours change, but also where if you were just alternating yarns in stockinette, you would get sort of little horizontal stripes between the two yarns. But because you're knitting and purling in this stitch pattern, it sort of blurs it, so it shifts the lines of the stitches and gives a much more blended effect. So this is actually one of my most worn jumpers because the colours go with pretty much all the clothes I have. And it's just really comfy and fits really nicely. So highly recommend that one. And you can just make a plain vanilla version with any of the colours. The gauge would work out really nicely. You can do contrast cuffs and neckband and hem as I've done here. It's just a really fun pattern and I love it. So next up is Opula. This is what I was wearing in the last episode. This is one of my designs, and I've made this one, you can see it's quite a small thing. I've made this one with negative ease, where usually I would go for a bit of positive ease. I just wanted a bit of a tighter fit, and so if you look at the pattern photos and things, it's quite fitted on me. And I've gone for the elbow length sleeves, but there are also options in the pattern for full length sleeves, and you can make it with, you know, 5 to 10 centimeters of positive ease for a more standard fit jumper. And I do like playing with ease like that because although patterns should give recommended ease, to indicate how something fits, I find it particularly useful when a pattern states how much ease the model is wearing with the design. So I will always give in my patterns how much ease I'm wearing the design with. So in this it'll say how much negative ease it is. I don't think it's loads, but it's some. Whereas often it's, you know, a bit more positive ease. And so by seeing how much ease the model is wearing it with, you can judge how that's going to fit a little bit on your body, depending on the amount of ease you prefer. Some designs, the amount of ease is a bit more particular depending on the fit. You know, there are something, there was a trend a while ago for very, very skinny arms and quite wide boxy bodies. So the amount of ease there is different because if you size down because you want less positive ease, you might actually end up with far too tight sleeves. Whereas this one, the sleeves have the same amount of ease as the body, so it all scales nicely. So this one is in teal and beach, both on the stormy base. You can see here on the cloudy base, if I can hold it up in a way that is sensible, the difference isn't huge. Like, you still get the same effect, and it's just very slightly cooler. So yes, that is Opula. That is available on my website and Ravelry. And yeah. Now I'm going to show you a couple of things I've made using Mendip 4-ply and one of my other bases. So this set is knitted in upside down mitts. Mendip 4-ply held together with Kaya Baby Alpaca. So I released these ones last year, just before I went on leave. I've got a nice bit of sunshine to show you the proper stitch patterns and everything. There we go. Yes, these are called the plicatum hat and mitts. Any botany dorks will enjoy that. So plicatum is a botanical Latin phrase for a term for when you've got leaves that are slightly sort of pleated or crinkly. So I named these specifically after Viburnum plicatum, because these cables here remind me of those sort of crinkly leaf structures. And yes, so matching hat and mitts. Let me get them on for you. I like when I just get to try stuff on. Have to have a bit of hair showing here when I wear the hats, because I much prefer how hats look on me when I have long hair, but I'm enjoying having short hair at the moment, so hey ho. So yes, fingerless mitts and a nice beanie. So the mitts I've designed so you can fold them back when you need to use your hands properly. And again, they've got the nice little pleat pattern on the back of the hand there, little twisty stitches, and then the hat also has some sections of moss stitch. Got nice crown decreases on the hat, which I always find really satisfying. And these ones are knitted with Mendip 4-ply. So this is the cloudy base. So again, you can see that this shows up a tiny bit warmer than this combination, but there isn't a whole lot in it. So this is Rose on the cloudy base, and this is Kaya Baby Alpaca in Pandora. And there are loads of fun colour combinations you can do with these, because I don't dye the same colours on the Kaya. The Kaya has like some dark, sort of rich jewel tones, and then some lighter, fresher, sort of pastel-y colours. But things like this one. This is Eos. That with clay could be really pretty. So this is slightly more yellowy, and this is a tiny bit darker and pinker. But there's not much contrast there, so that it almost wouldn't look like you were holding them together at all, so you wouldn't get much marling. But you do get the combined properties of both yarn. So held together, they come out as sort of like a DK weight. And the Kaya has really, really lovely fuzz. It's got this little halo, and it's really ridiculously soft. And so it just gives a lovely fabric, like you can see just on the hand there. The Mendip it probably still counts as a rustic yarn. It's a single flock yarn, it's woolen spun, but it is lamb's wool, so it is soft for that category of yarn, you know. It's not something that's super soft, but I think you can comfortably wear it next to the skin. It's quite nice. And so, but then the Kaya is something completely different. It's as I said, ridiculously soft. It's so, so nice. It's baby alpaca, so it's the first clip. So it's the first time the alpacas are shorn, which is always the softest. And it's just lovely and fuzzy, and you can see it's really, really drapey. And it's really lovely. So that's a nice pairing. Then something like Hippolyta with you on the cloudy base if you wanted to go for something with a bit of variegation. That's really nice, actually. I like that. Or if you wanted to go for some fresh greens, this is Anthea, and this is the Sunny Sage. They could be really nice together, and you get a little bit of that marling, but it would be quite soft and gentle. And so yeah, there are loads and loads of really lovely combinations you could do there. I always think this is nice. This is Cassiopeia, and this is Bloom Stormy. I think that would be really, really pretty. Yes, so that's those ones, Plicatum, Hat and Mitt. And then just one last look at Kaya and Mendip held together. This is my Rhombeal, which is a pattern from Pom Pom Quarterly issue 16, maybe? It was quite a long time ago. The design is by Gina Rockenragnar, and I love it. It's a very nice knit. And I used Fox in the Stormy, sorry, which is now Cloudy. And I held it together with Persephone, which I think is actually sold out now. But it does show how the solid Mendip held together with a variegated Kaya colour can look. And so yeah, I mean, I've talked about this one on my blog and things. I don't write on the blog as frequently as I should, but I'm going to try. Talking of the blog, sorry, I'm all over the place. I have written up a blog post about the new colours where you can see the whole range, and I've also done a roundup of all of the patterns that have been written for Mendip 4-ply specifically. So some of the things I've shown you here, plus some additional ones. There are some really lovely colourwork ones, some very simple mitts. I obviously haven't made samples of every pattern that's been designed for Mendip 4-ply because my knitting time is often dedicated to my own patterns. But there's lots of inspiration there, and people picking colour combinations that aren't necessarily ones I would have chosen myself because I have quite a specific taste in colour. But you can see how other designers have combined colours for colour work and things, and it's just really nice. So if you want some project inspiration in addition to what I've shown you here, I'll put a link to that blog post down in the box below, and you can have a read through if you're interested in that. Tell you about what is these days a very rare personal project. I casted on this one on Sunday as a little bit of a treat to myself after what was admittedly a bit of a rubbish week. baby was home from nursery with illness last week, and so while I was trying to get everything ready for the shop update, and I should have been recording this podcast, I was also trying to wrangle a little chaos agent, and it just gets quite draining. And so yeah, I decided on Sunday that I wanted to cast on something nice for myself, and there's not much to show yet because, as I said, I only casted on Sunday evening, and I had just enough time to do a little bit of swatching and get started. So I am making Llif, I think that's how you say that, but I'm not sure because I don't speak Welsh, by Teresa Shingler. It's spelled L-L-I-F. It's a sleeveless jumper, what traditionally we would call a tank top or a sweater vest these days. And it's got a panel of cables down the front. It's got really, really lovely details, and I have quite specific taste in a lot of things, and cables is one of them. I really like sort of quite geometric cables, but not too modern looking. And I've been keeping an eye on this pattern that Teresa's been working on for a while, and it was released somewhat recently, and it just has lots of really nice details. Like, I like when a pattern that has, you know, essential shaping elements that are part of creating the silhouette of whatever the design is. I like when those are paid attention to and turned into a feature, so you get nice structural elements, and this pattern has a lot of that. And I hadn't really intended to knit it, and then I was trying to decide what yarn I was going to use, and I remembered that towards the beginning of this year I blended up and spun some naturally dyed fibres that I had dyed over a while, just whenever I had a bit of natural dye left in a pot, or if I had some going extra after dyeing some yarn or fabric or anything, I would dye some bits of fibre. And so I decided to blend up loads of them, and spun it up into a sort of chunky weight 3-ply. Ooh, that's quite bright sunshine there. And so it's this sort of fairly warm, very slightly pinky toned neutral yarn. And it's a 3-ply, so it's got a little bit of structure to it, and it's quite round, but also it's quite fuzzy and tweedy because I included a lot of very short fibres in the blend. And I had loads of fun blending it up and spinning it, and then I ended up with sort of not quite as much yarn as I was hoping for. It turned out a little bit chunkier than I was expecting, which is fine, because I don't often spin a 3-ply. It's very rare that I do, actually. And so I sort of didn't really know what to do with it, because I've got just over 300 grams, and I was looking for a pattern, and then, you know, we moved house and things, and all of my yarn went into storage, and it sort of fell off my radar. And then I saw this pattern by Teresa, and I was trying to think what yarn to use, and then I remembered this yarn, and I thought it would be almost perfect. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'm not very good at knitting to the proper gauge for a pattern, and so here the yarn is very slightly heavier than the pattern calls for. It calls for an Aran weight, and this is more of a chunky, bulky weight. And I have a little bit less than the pattern calls for. So, where, you know, I don't really have much progress yet. I'm making the smallest size, where if I were using the correct gauge, I might knit the next size up. It's a fairly standard thing for me. If I'm using a chunkier yarn than the pattern specifies, I will often make a size smaller, so you have fewer stitches, and so because each of those stitches is bigger, it ends up being slightly bigger than the pattern measurements. And the same, if you're using a lighter yarn than the pattern specifies, you can make a bigger size, and then each stitch being smaller means that the finished object is smaller than the measurements in the pattern. It requires some calculations just to work out and make sure that you're doing the percentages correctly and things, so that you can roughly work out what gauge you're getting, what gauge the pattern is written for, and the difference between the two, and therefore proportionally how much bigger or smaller your project is going to be. So this one is going to be a little bit bigger than the pattern calls for, and I'm going to make it, even though the design is meant to be fairly cropped anyway, I'm going to make it even more so. I, despite being quite tall, have a very short torso. And so it's going to be a weird sort of, it'll come to about where my trousers are sitting there, I think. And then you'll have the panel of cables coming up here and then going up over the shoulders, and nice armhole shaping details and things. And you can just see so far the sort of the detail in the ribbing. You can see that I've got quite tweedy fluffy bits in the yarn, which I'm really enjoying. It's going to be a very sort of crunchy granola project, which I occasionally really like in my knitting. I really do like working with hand-spun that I've taken through multiple stages. I did, because I wasn't making videos at the point where I was making this yarn, because I was already on leave. I did post on Instagram a little bit about the process, and I just had loads of fun just blending up these fibres and spinning them up. And this yarn it's just quite an interesting one. Because it's got quite a few different fibres, there's some very short Kent Romney, which is quite fuzzy. It's sort of really short staple length, a little bit shorter than I'd actually consider. I bought it as scoured fleece and wasn't particularly happy with the length of fibre that was sent, but I had it and it wasn't particularly expensive. And so I have blended it with some alpaca, so some naturally fawn-coloured alpaca, and also a few bits of fleece that when I have sorted them, I've been saving up some fleece that I have scoured and have been flicking the tips to get nice long locks and separate out any shorter bits. But all of the shorter bits I have kept, and there's quite a lot of them. So that fleece I was preparing for a sort of worsted preparation yarn, whereas these are much more suited to a woolen. And so all of those short bits I kept and have used in this. And then there's also some rose fibre in here, which was given to me by a friend, which I dyed with avocado. And so it's as I often do with my spinning, it's a bit of a random mix that has led to just quite a pleasing, very, very earthy yarn. And so, yes, I realise it's not particularly interesting to look at this stage, but if you want to see how it progresses, I'm sure I'll still be working on it in the podcast next time, because I've got a lot of other knitting to do in between. So this is definitely just going to be a weekend project while I focus on actual work knits during the week. And most of my, good thing about knitting on designs is that I can do it around a lot of other things. I can pick it up and put it down, and as long as I've written the pattern or up to the stage of the pattern that I need in advance, I can do little bits without having to concentrate too hard, which is sort of essential for the way everything is working out at the moment. Other than in the evening, I don't get long stretches of time to focus on a single thing. It's all over the place. And yeah, so it's just, I'm still very much adapting to working around obviously massive changes in my life, and just working out what the business looks like with that and where to focus my time. And so with that, I am going to mention Patreon, because my patrons have been really, really supportive, and they are one of the things that is really, really helping with me just getting back on my feet with the business and with making videos, and helping me to sort of take my time a bit. I wanted to get all of this yarn dyed up and ready much sooner than I have been able to, just because everything has been very slow. And being able to do some things for Patreon. So I do monthly calls with the people who want to join from Patreon. And it's just a nice Zoom chat, and we've got a nice little Discord group. And you get discounts on yarn. So, if you're considering buying some Mendip or anything, or any of my patterns, it's worth looking into a Patreon membership, just to see whether the discounts will be worth it there. And yeah, you get bonus little videos which are more making focused. So if I'm doing a focus on a project that I'm working on at the moment, most of that video content is going on Patreon at the moment, just because it's quite difficult to set aside the time to record. So yeah, Patreon is really helping to keep the podcast going. It was always intended to be that way, but that is far more true now than it ever was. So if you really do enjoy the podcast and want to make sure that I'm actually able to keep focusing on making good content for you guys, I would really appreciate if you'd go and have a look and see whether you're able to spare a little bit to be part of a really nice little community. And so with that, I think that's all I've got for you this month. And that's another thing. Once I get more patrons, I've got some goals set on there. Once I've got more patrons, I should be able to film more frequently, because it means that this part of what I'm doing is more worthwhile for me. And I don't like to phrase it necessarily in that terms, but because I really, really love doing the podcast. But where previously it was something that I did because I enjoy it and it's nice to share what I'm working on, at the moment I have to make sure that I am putting my time into things that are really worth it for me. So yeah, I hope that's not too weird and awkward. It always gets a bit strange. But I really do love chatting with you guys, and thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.